There comes a moment rare and unspeakably profound, when a man looks upon the world not with hunger, but with quiet disillusionment. A moment when the glitter of gold fades before the flame of truth, and even the warmest silks of royalty feel coarse against the raw skin of awakening. This is the story of such a man, not born in shadows but bathed in splendor. A prince groomed for dominion, whose destiny was not to rule empires but to dismantle the illusion of self. His name was Siddhartha Gautama, and his throne was not merely a seat of power, it was a cage, gilded and serene. But he chose to walk away, not to lead an army, nor to claim new lands, but to master the battlefield of the mind. If these stories stir something ancient in you, if you've ever wondered why the wisest turn inward when the world beckons outward, then stay with us on this journey. Let us walk the silent roads of ancient India, beneath the Bodhi tree and beyond the walls of palaces. Subscribe not just to a channel, but to a deeper inquiry, one that echoes through the caves of stillness and the scriptures of time. This is not just a story, it is a call to remember what you already know. Siddhartha Gautama was born in the verdant plains of Lumbini, near the foothills of the Himalayas, around the 6th century. The air was thick with jasmine and hope the night he arrived. His mother, Queen Maya, dreamed of a white elephant entering her womb, a vision interpreted by Brahmin sages as a sign of a divine birth. The child would either become a great king, a Chakravartin, ruler of the known world, a Buddha, one who awakens and shows others the path to liberation. His father, King Suddhodana of the Shakya clan, feared the latter, not because it was shameful, but because it threatened the dynastic ambitions he harbored. He wanted a king, not a renunciation. And so, from the very moment of Siddhartha's first cry, the world was arranged to protect him from suffering. High walls were built, not of stone alone, but of illusion. The boy grew amidst lakes of lotus blossoms and palaces adorned with sandalwood carvings. He was surrounded by dancers, musicians, and scholars, all devoted to his delight. Pain, decay, and death, these words were scrubbed from his world like dust from marble. The Digha Nikaya tells us that 3 palaces were built for the prince, one for each season, each more luxurious than the last. He was given the finest garments, the choicest foods, and the most beautiful companions. His every whim was met before he even voiced it. Yet within, the prince's mind stirred with a silent unrest. Like a bird born in a golden cage, he knew only freedom's shadow. He studied the Vedas, practiced martial arts, and excelled in every discipline expected of a future king. But the questions that formed within him, what lies beyond this pleasure? What is the end of joy? Were not so easily pacified. At 16, he was wed to Yasodhara, a woman of beauty and grace, matched to him by astrological alignment and royal convenience. They were deeply affectionate, yet Siddhartha's love for her was never possessive. Even in his youth, his heart knew that clinging, even to sweetness, could sour the soul. One day, despite the king's careful protection, Siddhartha left the palace grounds. In what would later be known as the 4 sights, he encountered truths no luxury could veil. First, he saw an old man bent and trembling, bones knotted by time. Then a sick man ravaged by disease, groaning in helpless agony. Third, a corpse, lifeless, pale, followed by mourners draped in silence. And finally, a wandering ascetic, serene, composed, eyes like still waters reflecting eternity. These visions shattered the prince's illusion of permanence. As the Dhammapada later records, all conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. The seed of renunciation was sown. He returned to the palace, but it no longer felt like home. The silk cushions pricked like thorns. The laughter of courtiers echoed hollow. Every joy was now shadowed by the knowledge of its decay. Siddhartha's agony was not melodrama. It was existential clarity. He saw that power could not protect one from aging, that love could not prevent loss, that wealth could not bribe death. He saw that even the most exquisite pleasure was tied to impermanence, and thus to sorrow. The Majjhima Nikaya captures this reflection in the Buddha's own words. "Monks, I too, before my awakening, when I was still an unawakened bodhisattva, considered thus, this world has fallen into trouble, born, aging, and dying, it weeps, yet there is no one who knows the escape from this suffering." He cut off his hair with a single stroke, exchanged his fine garments for the coarse robe of a wandering seeker, and entered the life of a sramana, a homeless renunciate. The throne was behind him, before him, the unknown. But his journey had only just begun, so he made his decision, not hastily, but with the deliberate grace of a man stepping into his own breath. On the night his son Rahula was born, Siddhartha looked upon the sleeping faces of his wife and child, and whispered a goodbye no one could hear. He kissed no forehead, took no farewell. To linger would be to falter. He mounted his horse, Kanthaka, and with his faithful charioteer Channa, rode into the forest under a moon that bore silent witness to a prince's abdication, not of duty, but of delusion. The forests of ancient India were not silent. They hummed with the breath of ascetics and the rustle of bodhi leaves. In these woods, where no palace walls softened the wind, Siddhartha walked barefoot among the seekers of truth. He entered a world of extremes, of starvation and stillness, of silence and searing resolve. Here, wisdom was sought, not in scrolls, but in the marrow of suffering itself. He studied first under Kalama, a sage of profound meditative discipline. Under his guidance, Siddhartha mastered the formless realm of infinite space, attaining deep absorption states known as jhanas. Alara offered him equal status, declaring him his peer, but Siddhartha, ever alert to the scent of incompleteness, saw that even such rarefied states did not uproot craving. These attainments were sublime, yes, but transient. They led to rebirth in heavenly realms, not to liberation from the cycle itself. And so, bowing with respect, he moved on. Next, he trained under Udaka Ramaputta, who taught the meditation of neither perception nor non-perception. Again, Siddhartha achieved mastery. Again, he declined honor. Again, he walked away, for his heart was no longer drawn to ecstasy. It was hungry for truth, as the Sutta Nipata echoes, not through matted hair, nor family, nor birth does one become a Brahmana, but the one in whom truth and Dharma dwell, he is truly a Brahmana. Siddhartha then turned to the harshest austerities. Along the banks of the Niranjara River, near present-day Bodh Gaya, he subjected his body to relentless mortification. He ate so little that his spine was visible from his belly. He held his breath until he fainted. His skin clung to bone, like wet bark to a dying tree. The other ascetics revered him, mistaking his endurance for spiritual advancement. But Siddhartha knew better. One day, after nearly starving himself to death, he collapsed. In that moment of frailty, a gentle memory arose. As a child, he had once sat beneath a rose-apple tree during the spring plowing festival. His mind had settled into a calm, luminous concentration, natural and serene. That memory was like a whisper from the soul, reminding him of a middle way, not between indulgence and pain, but through clarity and balance. Realizing this, he abandoned self-mortification. The other ascetics, shocked and offended, turned away from him. But Siddhartha no longer needed their approval. He bathed in the river. A young village girl, Sujata, offered him a bowl of sweet rice milk, a simple gift that restored his strength. It was not indulgence, it was wisdom. The Dhammapada reminds us, neither abstaining nor indulging, but treading the path of understanding, that is the way. He prepared himself for the final confrontation, not with demons of the world, but with the roots of suffering in the mind itself. Beneath the Bodhi tree, known then as the Tree of Awakening, Siddhartha sat cross-legged, vowing not to rise until he had found the end of sorrow. The tree's leaves shimmered under the starlit sky. The earth held its breath, for this was no ordinary meditation. It was a battle of cosmic consequence. Mara, the personification of delusion and death, arose with his armies, storming the mind of Siddhartha with fear, desire, doubt, and pride. Tempests shook the heavens. Arrows of illusion darkened the sky, but Siddhartha sat unmoved, his awareness clear, his compassion vast. The arrows turned to flowers before they could touch him. Mara's final weapon was subtle. He whispered, "Who do you think you are, to claim enlightenment? By what right do you sit here, seeking to awaken?" In response, Siddhartha reached down and touched the earth with his right hand. The earth itself thundered in witness. Trees swayed, rivers paused. The moment was timeless. With that gesture, Siddhartha affirmed that his right came not from lineage or ego, but from lifetimes of compassion, patience, and resolve. As dawn approached, the last vestiges of ignorance dissolved. The fetters of craving and aversion fell away. The cycle of birth and death, samsara, was seen clearly for what it was, an endless wheel, driven by delusion. And in that perfect stillness, as the morning star rose, Siddhartha became the Buddha, the awakened one. He had conquered not the world, but the world maker, the mind. His first utterance after enlightenment was not of pride, but of quiet realization. "Through many births I wandered, seeking the builder of this house. Painful is repeated birth, but now I have seen you, house builder. You shall not build this house again." Dhammapada. He did not rush to preach. For 7 weeks he remained near the Bodhi tree, contemplating the profundity of what had been realized. In the Anattalakkhana Sutta, the Buddha would later teach, form is not self, feeling is not self, perception is not self, formations are not self, consciousness is not self. These insights shattered the illusion of a permanent, unchanging self, the root of clinging, of suffering. The Buddha saw with unclouded eyes that all phenomena arise due to causes and conditions. Nothing exists independently. This is the law of dependent origination. Paticca Samuppada, which he described as the heart of the Dharma. From ignorance arises volitional formations. From formations, consciousness. From consciousness, name and form. And on it goes, culminating in aging, sorrow, and death. But remove ignorance, and the whole chain collapses. The conquest he achieved was invisible, internal, yet more profound than any battle won with sword or fire. He had faced the root of fear, the snare of desire, the mirage of selfhood, and walked beyond them. The Buddha's serenity was not the calm of ignorance, but the luminous peace of one who sees clearly. He had no need for a kingdom. He had found the path beyond kingship, beyond mortality, beyond becoming. And so he rose, not as a prince, but as a guide, not as a god, but as a mirror. His every step now would be in service of awakening, not just his own, but that of all beings. Compassion, sharpened by wisdom, became his scepter. The Dharma, timeless and self-verifying, his crown. The newly awakened Buddha gazed upon the world, not with detachment, but with boundless compassion. though he had attained the ultimate liberation, the bliss of Nibbana. He did not retreat into isolation. Instead, he turned his footsteps toward the dust-laden paths of humanity. He had crossed the shoreless ocean of samsara, and yet he returned, like a bodhisattva in silent vows, to ferry others across. At first, he hesitated, not from fear, but from a deep awareness of the subtlety of what he had realized. This Dharma I have attained is deep, hard to see, hard to realize, peaceful, sublime, beyond the sphere of reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. Ariyapariyasana Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 26. Who would understand it? How could one explain the unconditioned to those intoxicated with sense pleasures? But then Brahma Sahampati, the great deity of compassion, appeared and pleaded with the Buddha to teach, for there were beings with little dust in their eyes who would understand. Moved by this, the Buddha arose and began to walk his only wealth, the Dharma, his only burden, the suffering of others. His first destination was the Deer Park in Isapatana, modern-day Sarnath, where his former companions still practiced. These 5 ascetics, who had abandoned him when he gave up self-mortification, now saw in him a radiant serenity that stirred reverence. Though at first they resisted, the Buddha's presence silenced all doubt. There, under the shade of rustling trees, he gave his first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, setting the wheel of Dharma in motion. In it he taught the middle way, the 4 noble truths, and the noble eightfold path. He spoke not of belief, but of direct seeing. There is suffering, there is an origin of suffering, there is cessation, there is a path. The truths were not commands, but invitations to look inward. With these words, the Dharma was born into the world, not as a doctrine of gods or blind rituals, but as a path to freedom rooted in insight. As he taught, one of the 5 Khandanya opened his Dhamma eye. Whatever is subject to origination is also subject to cessation. With this, the Sangha, the community of awakened seekers, was born. Over the next 45 years, the Buddha wandered on foot across the Gangetic plains. He wore a simple robe of discarded cloth, slept under trees or in modest huts, and taught kings and beggars alike. His feet touched both marble courtyards and muddy fields. He never asked for gold, never built temples, never established a hierarchy. He simply shared what he had realized, that liberation is possible here. The Buddha's presence was not magnetic due to miracles, though many legends would later surround him. His power lay in his unwavering clarity, his boundless empathy, and his complete lack of self-interest. He was not a prophet of commandments, but a physician of suffering. He diagnosed, explained the cause, showed the cure, and prescribed the medicine of mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom. He taught that suffering arises not from external conditions alone, but from within, from craving, clinging, and ignorance. Even pleasure becomes suffering when we fear its loss. Even identity becomes suffering when we try to solidify what is inherently changing. The Buddha described life as anicca, impermanent, dukkha, unsatisfactory, and anatta, not self. These were not pessimistic views, but precise observations of experience. Like a surgeon, he did not shy from the wound. He illuminated it. Among his many encounters, one stands out for its quiet power. A man named Kisa Gautami came to the Buddha, carrying the lifeless body of her infant son. Mad with grief, she begged him for medicine. The Buddha told her to gather mustard seeds from a house where no one had died. She searched all day, but found no such home. Every door she knocked on revealed another story of loss. When she returned empty-handed, she understood death was not her personal tragedy. It was the shared condition of all beings. She placed her son's body down and entered the Sangha. This was the Buddha's way, not to erase sorrow, but to awaken insight through experience. He also counseled kings, like Bimbisara of Magadha, who became a devoted patron, and later King Pasenadi of Kusala, who struggled with attachment and pride. To both, the Buddha taught that rulership of the self was nobler than rulership of land. Though one should conquer 1,000 men in battle, yet he who conquers himself is the noblest victor. Dhamma. In his interaction with Angulimala, a fearsome bandit who had killed nearly 100 people, the Buddha did not judge, threaten, or punish. He simply walked toward him with composure. Angulimala, astonished by the Buddha's fearlessness, demanded that he stop. The Buddha replied, "I have stopped, Angulimala. It is you who have not stopped." These words pierced the killer's heart. He renounced violence, became a monk, and later attained arahantship. In the Buddha's eyes, no one was beyond redemption, not because he was naive, but because he saw the potential for awakening in all. His teachings were universal yet profoundly personal. He accepted women into the monastic order, forming the Bhikkhuni Sangha, despite social resistance. He taught that enlightenment knows no caste, no gender, no title. All beings, princes or outcasts, men or women, devas or ghosts, carry within them the seed of awakening. In the Therigatha, the verses of early enlightened nuns, one finds voices of women who had suffered abuse, abandonment, and poverty, but who found liberation through the Buddha's path. Pitaka, who lost her entire family to tragedy, overcame her madness and became a radiant teacher. These were not just conversions, they were resurrections of the soul. The Buddha refused to answer metaphysical questions he deemed unhelpful. When asked whether the universe is eternal or what happens to an enlightened being after death, he remained silent. Not because he didn't know, but because such inquiries did not lead to awakening. He compared it to a man shot with a poisoned arrow, who refuses treatment until he knows who made the arrow, what wood it was carved from, and who shot it. The important thing, the Buddha taught, is to remove the arrow. This practical clarity became the essence of the Dharma, not to debate reality, but to experience it directly. Not to theorize about liberation, but to realize it. The Buddha's life was one of paradoxical majesty. He had no possessions, yet he was the richest in insight. He commanded no armies, yet his words still move empires of thought. He renounced the crown, but became the sovereign of hearts. And as his fame spread, he remained unchanged. He continued to walk barefoot, continued to eat what was offered, continued to dwell in the forest during the rainy season. For the Buddha had conquered not with force, but with the absence of clinging, and that victory, silent, invisible, complete, became the very axis on which the wheel of Dharma would turn for centuries to come. As the years passed, the Buddha's footsteps wore gentle paths across the northern plains of India, from Rajagaha to Sravasti, from Vesali to Kapilavatthu. He walked in silence, in sun and rain, through dusty roads and shaded groves, accompanied by monks, nuns, and sometimes by those who were simply curious. And in every village, in every gaze he met, he carried the same message: liberation is possible. Suffering can end, not in some distant heaven, not by divine favor, but by seeing things as they truly are. He did not preach in ornate temples. His sermons were not cloaked in riddles, under banyan trees, beside rivers, among rice fields. He spoke of the mind's fetters of greed, hatred, and delusion. He described the mind not as an enemy, but as a wild elephant that could be trained. Just as a fletcher straightens an arrow, so the wise straighten their wavering mind. Dhammapada 33. Again and again, he returned to the practice of mindfulness, sati, as the doorway to freedom. In the Satipatthana Sutta, he outlined this path with precision: mindfulness of the body, of feelings, of mind, and of mental objects. To watch the breath, the posture, the sensations as they arise and pass. To see the impermanence in every experience, not merely intellectually, but viscerally, with the intimacy of one observing fire consume wood. To feel the heat of craving and the coolness of relief. He taught that clinging is the root of suffering, not just to objects, but to views, identities, even to the idea of the self. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. When one lets go of these thoughts, peace flows in like water into a dry well. The mind, unburdened by stories and roles, returns to its natural state, clear, luminous, and aware. The Buddha's teachings were not rigid. He tailored his words to each listener. To a warrior, he spoke of the discipline of the noble path. To a grieving mother, he offered the medicine of impermanence. To a skeptic, he advised self-examination. Do not go by hearsay, by tradition, or by sacred texts. But when you know for yourself that something is skillful and leads to welfare, then follow it. Kalama Sutta. He urged his followers to test the Dharma like gold, to melt, cut, and examine it. He did not ask for blind faith. He encouraged inner revolution, forged through effort and insight. He was not a gatekeeper, but a mirror. In the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha said, "Be a lamp unto yourselves, be islands unto yourselves." With the Dharma as your lamp and the Dharma as your refuge. Despite his popularity, the Buddha never hoarded disciples. He never claimed divine status. He identified himself only as Tathagata, one who has thus gone. When asked if he was a god or a prophet, he replied, "I am awake." That awakening was not an escape from the world, but a re-seeing of it. Samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death, was not somewhere else. It was here, now, in every craving, every aversion, every illusion of I and mine. Even his own clan, the Shekyas, did not receive special treatment. When he returned to Kapilavatthu, now a wandering teacher and not a prince, his father initially resisted bowing. But upon hearing the Buddha's words, Suddhodana understood that his son had achieved something no throne could offer. Yasodhara too watched silently as the Sangha approached, recognizing the flame in Siddhartha's eyes. Later, both she and their son Rahula would enter the monastic life. The Buddha's compassion was not sentimental. It was fierce in its clarity. When disputes arose within the Sangha, he addressed them with firmness, emphasizing harmony and mutual respect. When Devadatta, his cousin and disciple, attempted to divide the community and even plotted to harm him, the Buddha did not retaliate. He met deceit with equanimity, betrayal with steadfastness. For he had conquered the most dangerous enemy, self-centeredness, and he taught others to do the same. The Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, was not a moral checklist, but a living discipline. It wove ethics, meditation, and wisdom into a seamless way of being. Each step supported the other, like spokes of a wheel turning together toward freedom. The Buddha did not promise immortality. He offered something deeper: release from the very fear of death. When one sees that nothing truly belongs to the self, then death is not a loss, but a transformation, like a wave settling back into the sea. All conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence. These were among his final words. He continued to teach into his 80s. Even as his body aged and illness took hold, his mind remained clear, radiant. He knew his time was near, and yet he did not dwell in sentiment. He made no demand for worship. He appointed no successor. The Dharma and Vinaya, he said, shall be your teacher after I am gone. In his final journey to Kusinara, the Buddha paused under the twin sala trees. He lay on his right side, in the lion's posture, facing the west. The sky was golden with falling blossoms. Even the devas wept, but the Buddha was serene. In those last hours he spoke not of mysticism or visions, but of the essentials, impermanence, effort, mindfulness. As he entered parinibbana, the final passing away of one who has broken all fetters, there was no drama, only silence. A silence more profound than words. The kind that is felt in the marrow, the kind that frees. And so the Buddha left the world, not in sorrow, but in stillness. Not in triumph, but in truth. He had given up the throne, not to escape life, but to embrace it fully, and then to transcend it. He had walked away from power not to abandon responsibility, but to take up the noblest of all tasks, the liberation of being. His teachings survived not because of monuments or armies, but because they spoke to something timeless in the human spirit, because they answered a question older than language. Why do we suffer? And they offered a path that begins, simply and courageously, in the mind. Centuries have passed since the Buddha walked the dusty paths of India. Yet his footprints remain not in soil but in spirit. His words carried from generation to generation, etched into palm leaves and whispered in meditation halls, continue to stir awakening in hearts across continents. For what he offered was not bound by time or culture. It was a path woven from the threads of silence, insight, and fearless compassion. He was not a god who demanded worship. He was not a prophet laying down divine decree. He was a human being, utterly awake, who dared to look at suffering not as a curse, but as a key. He took the brokenness of the world and used it as a mirror to see the mind. He knew that every palace would crumble, every body would weaken, every attachment would end in tears. Yet instead of despair, he found the way out, a path that begins with the courage to observe and ends with the serenity of release. The Buddha's decision to leave the palace was not an act of rejection, but of transcendence. He was not fleeing responsibility, but fulfilling it in its highest form. As Walpola Rahula wrote, the Buddha was the first religious teacher in the world to teach through reason and experience, not through fear, punishment, or reward. The renunciation of Siddhartha was the ultimate act of rebellion, not against society, but against the very root of delusion. His choice to conquer the mind, rather than the world, is what sets him apart from kings and conquerors. Alexander the Great subdued vast territories, but he could not subdue his own restlessness. Emperors built cities that now lie in ruins, but the Buddha built no empire, yet his teachings still stand. He ruled no kingdom, yet hearts still bow before his wisdom. In his teachings, the inner world is the true battlefield, and the enemies are not people, but greed, hatred, and ignorance. To conquer these is to taste a freedom greater than any throne can offer. As the Buddha said, victory breeds hatred. The defeated live in pain. The peaceful one lives happily, giving up victory and defeat. Dhamma, this is the Dharma, not a set of beliefs to memorize, but a mirror to see oneself clearly. It is not a promise of paradise elsewhere, but an invitation to wake up here, now, to see the breath, the thought, the emotion, not as mine, but as processes unfolding, to let go, not out of indifference, but out of understanding, to live not in pursuit, but in present. The Buddha taught that there is no self to defend, no soul to save, no eternal essence to cling to. At first glance, this may seem stark, but it is the very doorway to liberation. When the self is seen as a fiction, what remains is spaciousness, openness, compassion without agenda. As Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, the wave does not need to die to become water. She is already water. This teaching dissolves the roots of fear. For if there is no fixed self, then what can truly be harmed? What is there to protect, to grasp, to resist? Suffering, then, is not the enemy, it is the signal. The bell that rings when we cling to what cannot be held. Through mindfulness and insight, the Buddha showed that even the most entrenched habits of craving can be uprooted. Like a fire extinguished for lack of fuel, the mind can come to rest. This cessation, nirodha, is not annihilation, but peace. A peace not dependent on conditions, a joy that arises from release. This is why the Buddha's face is always serene. Not because he closed his eyes to the world, but because he opened them fully. He saw the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death, not as punishments, but as truths, and in seeing them, he transcended them. He lived in perfect simplicity, owned nothing, claimed nothing, desired nothing, and yet he gave everything. He gave the world a way to heal itself, a path not paved in dogma, but in awareness, not guarded by priests, but accessible to all monk or layperson, scholar or shepherd, king or outcast. Even today, as we rush through screens and noise, as we build towers of ambition and trenches of comparison, the Buddha's quiet voice calls from beneath the Bodhi tree. Come and see. Ehepasiko, come and see for yourself. Don't believe because others believe. Don't worship because others kneel. Look, breathe, observe. This invitation is eternal, and in accepting it we begin to walk as he walked, not in robes or rituals, but in awareness. Every step, every breath, every moment becomes the ground of practice. We do not need to abandon our lives to follow him. We only need to turn inward, to listen, to see. And when we do, we begin to understand why he left the palace. Not because he hated the world, but because he loved it too deeply to be deceived by its surface. He gave up the throne not for solitude, but for truth, not for asceticism, but for awakening. His was a path of supreme responsibility, a responsibility to see clearly, act wisely, and love boundlessly. He walked away from gold to find what no jewel could offer. He walked into the forest, into silence, into death and birth and fear and transcendence, not to escape life, but to embrace it wholly. And in that embrace, he discovered the one thing that could never be taken away: freedom. May we too find the courage to walk our own forests, to sit beneath the tree of our own hearts, to let go of what binds us and remember what we truly are. The Buddha's legacy is not in relics or statues, but in the stillness between our thoughts, in the breath that pauses before clinging, in the wisdom that chooses compassion over control, in the moment we see things as they are and rest. And so, if this voice has stirred something quiet in you, a longing not for more, but for less noise, less illusion, less suffering, then let it grow. Let it guide you to the middle way, to mindfulness, to peace. For in the end, the Buddha did not leave the world. He showed us how to return to it, with open eyes, open hands, and an open heart. All conditioned things are impermanent. All things are not self. All phenomena are dukkha. But there is a path beyond them. Walk it. This is the path of the Buddha. This is the reason he gave up the throne, not to abandon the world, but to free it.